Somewhere in Tunisia, in February 1943, a German maintenance sergeant crouched beside an olive-drab motorcycle, his hands trembling as he removed the air cleaner cover. The Harley-Davidson WLA sat silent in a captured American motor pool, surrounded by dozens of identical machines. He had been a mechanic for 15 years, trained in the traditions of German precision engineering and accustomed to working on BMWs, the epitome of European motorcycle design. But what he was looking at now filled him with a sense of unease that went far beyond mechanics. It was not just a motorcycle before him. It was a message, written in steel and gasoline. The message was simple and devastating. America could bury them. By German standards, the Harley-Davidson WLA was crude. Its 45 cubic inch flathead engine used a side valve design that German engineers had long abandoned in favor of more efficient overhead valve systems. The front suspension was an outdated Springer type, and the rear had no suspension at all, earning these bikes the nickname hardtails among American riders. The 3-speed hand-shift transmission was basic, almost agricultural in design. Everything about the motorcycle prioritized mass production over refinement, quantity over sophistication. But that was precisely what made it terrifying. The sergeant ran his fingers along the frame. The welds were good, not the perfect work of a master craftsman, but consistent and reliable. The paint was evenly applied, the components fitted together with the kind of uniformity that spoke of precision tooling and strict quality control. It had been built quickly, but it had been built well. Then he saw the manufacturer's plate, serial number 42 WLA 43576. The 42 indicated the production year, 1942, even if this particular machine had rolled off the line in early 1943. The Americans had standardized their wartime manufacturing and record-keeping to focus entirely on output. The rest of the number made his stomach drop. Serial 43,576. That meant at least 43,576 of these motorcycles had already been produced by the time this one left the factory. 43,000 motorcycles of a single model, built by one manufacturer in less than 2 years. He thought of Germany's BMW 75, considered the finest military motorcycle of its kind. Only 16,500 units had been built between 1940 and 1945. 5 years of maximum war effort had yielded fewer machines than the Americans produced of this one model in just 18 months. And the United States wasn't rationing steel for these. They weren't choosing between motorcycles and tanks. They were building both. They were building everything. The story of the Harley-Davidson WLA began in 1940, more than a year before Pearl Harbor brought America into the war. The U.S. Army, watching Europe burn, issued specifications for a military motorcycle, something simple, reliable, and easy to mass-produce by workers who might never have built one before. Harley-Davidson responded with the WLA, a militarized version of its civilian WL model. The W indicated the 45 cubic inch flathead engine family, L referred to high compression, though in practice the Army model used medium compression for durability, and A stood for Army. The design was intentionally conservative. The 739cc engine produced a modest 25 horsepower at 4,500 RPM, not impressive compared to the BMW R71's 22 horsepower or the R75's 26. But power was never the point. The WLA's side valve engine was virtually indestructible. Its low 5-to-1 compression ratio meant it could run on 74-octane fuel, a low-grade gasoline that would have wrecked high-performance German engines. The air-cooled design eliminated fragile radiator systems, and its simple valve train meant fewer parts to break. Everything was built for endurance, not speed. The transmission was equally straightforward. A 3-speed gearbox, hand-shifted by a lever on the tank and operated with a foot clutch. German riders found this setup awkward. On their BMWs, the clutch was hand-operated and the gears shifted by foot. But it worked. The front Springer fork used dual parallel springs and a friction damper, while the rigid rear relied on a sprung saddle for comfort. It was crude, but it functioned reliably in all terrains. What made the WLA truly remarkable wasn't its design, it was the industrial system that produced it. In 1941, Harley-Davidson was still a civilian company, making bikes for police and hobby riders. By 1942, it had become a 24-hour war factory. The Milwaukee assembly lines were filled with women who had never touched a wrench before the war, now building motorcycles with a consistency and precision unimaginable in peacetime. Production numbers told the story. In 1940, Harley built only a few hundred WLAs for testing. By 1941, that number grew to several thousand. After Pearl Harbor, production exploded. 10,000, then 20,000, then 30,000 units. By the end of the war, Harley-Davidson had produced more than 90,000 WLA and WLC motorcycles, the latter being a heavier Canadian version. In addition, the company manufactured enough spare parts to assemble 30,000 more bikes, creating full inventories of engines, frames, wheels, and every necessary component to keep them running in the field. For this extraordinary contribution, Harley-Davidson received the Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in War Production, twice, in 1943 and 1945. The ceremonies were grand, attended by high-ranking officers and flyovers by military aircraft. Workers were awarded small pins to wear on their lapels, marking them as soldiers of the assembly line. It wasn't propaganda. It was recognition of an industrial miracle. The WLA's simplicity made such production possible. Each bike required around 3,000 parts, far fewer than an aircraft, but still a demanding assembly. Yet its design allowed for rapid worker training. Women who had been secretaries or clerks could learn to install engines or wire electrical systems in matters of weeks. The forgiving tolerances meant small manufacturing variations didn't cripple the machines. It was, by modern standards, a masterclass in design for manufacturability. Despite the enormous scale of production, quality control remained strict. Each motorcycle underwent testing before being accepted by Army inspectors. Units that failed were corrected, ensuring that standards were maintained even during the height of wartime pressure. The low rejection rate proved that the system worked. Quality through intelligent design, not artisanal craftsmanship. Distribution was equally massive. More than 30,000 WLAs were sent to the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program, with thousands more shipped to Britain, Canada, China, India, South Africa, and other allied nations. The Harley-Davidson WLA became the most widely used American motorcycle in history, operating in climates that ranged from Arctic snow to tropical jungle heat, from desert dust to monsoon mud. Back in Tunisia, the German sergeant had stopped examining just one motorcycle. He was now counting them. 73 WLAs in this depot alone. 73 machines, each a symbol of industrial might. 73 machines representing only a few days of American production. And in that realization, the sergeant finally understood the terrifying truth. Germany's engineers might have built the best machines, but America had built enough of them to win the war.
He thought about the staggering industrial capacity it must have taken to build machines like these, ship them across the Atlantic through submarine-infested waters, and distribute them to forward units thousands of miles from the factories that made them. Everyone knew the Americans lost ships to U-boats, but what mattered more was that they replaced them faster than Germany could sink them. Each of these motorcycles had crossed the ocean packed tightly in crates within cargo holds, then arrived in North Africa to support frontline operations far from home. The sergeant picked up a maintenance log left behind during the American retreat. The Harley before him had 3,200 miles on its odometer. According to the records, it had received regular oil changes, one clutch adjustment, 2 sets of spark plugs, and a single carburetor cleaning. That was all. Over 3,000 miles of military use in desert conditions, and the only maintenance required was basic upkeep. He thought of the BMW R75s in his own unit, magnificent machines, technological marvels with overhead valve engines, 4-speed transmissions, reverse gears, and shaft drives powering both the rear and sidecar wheels. They even had a differential transfer case for low-range gearing. They were masterpieces of engineering and nightmares of practicality. The R75 could handle rough terrain the Harley couldn't, carry heavier loads, and outperform the American motorcycle in nearly every measurable way. But it came at a cost. It needed skilled mechanics, specialized tools, a steady flow of spare parts, and most of all, time. And time was the one thing the Wehrmacht no longer had. When the war began, Germany had roughly 150 motorcycle manufacturers ready to produce for the military. The wartime rationalization program, known as Shell, had already reduced that number to about 30 before the invasion of Poland. By 1940, heavy military motorcycle production was concentrated in just 2 firms, BMW and Zundap. Between 1940 and 1945, BMW produced approximately 16,500 R75s. Zundap built around 18,700 KS750s. Combined, German heavy motorcycle output totaled roughly 35,200 machines. The Americans, by contrast, had produced more than 90,000 Harley-Davidson WLAs, plus enough spare parts to build another 30,000. The arithmetic was brutal. For every German heavy motorcycle produced, the Americans built 3 Harleys. But the difference went far beyond mere numbers. German motorcycles were crafted by skilled laborers using precision tools and high-grade materials that were growing scarcer by the month. Each BMW R75 required resources that could have been used for more strategically critical equipment, a weapons carrier, an artillery tractor, or even a tank. Every hour spent crafting a motorcycle was an hour not spent producing an aircraft or submarine. For the Americans, motorcycles were an industrial afterthought, just one small line item in a mobilization so vast it defied imagination. While Harley-Davidson assembled 90,000 WLAs, American factories turned out more than 86,000 tanks, nearly 300,000 aircraft, nearly 2 million army trucks, and almost 193,000 artillery pieces. The United States produced nearly 2/3 of all Allied military hardware during the war, and did so while maintaining civilian production levels that would have made any European economy at peace envious. The sergeant noticed an ammunition box mounted to one of the Harleys. Opening it, he found a small field toolkit, wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, and spark plug sockets. Everything a soldier would need for on-the-spot repairs. The tools were simple, stamped steel, unremarkable, but effective. Every WLA was issued with one. 90,000 motorcycles meant 90,000 toolkits scattered across the globe, allowing troops to fix their own machines in the field without sending them back to depots. He thought of Germany's logistics system, already stretched to the breaking point by the sheer size of the war. Spare parts for BMWs came from Munich and had to travel through a supply network designed for a much smaller army operating within Europe's borders. But now German forces were fighting from Norway to Egypt, from France to the gates of Stalingrad. The supply system simply couldn't keep up. A BMW with a broken transmission might sit useless for weeks, waiting for a replacement part to arrive, if it arrived at all. Allied bombing was steadily destroying Germany's industrial infrastructure, cutting production while at the same time increasing the demand for replacements. The Harley-Davidson WLA embodied a completely different philosophy, one that valued simplicity, standardization, and scale over technical perfection. It wasn't the best motorcycle in the world, but it was good enough, easy to fix, and available in overwhelming numbers, and that was truly what mattered.
The American manufacturing philosophy could be summed up in one idea: build it strong and build so many that losses don't matter. If a Harley-Davidson WLA broke down and couldn't be repaired quickly, American soldiers simply abandoned it and requisitioned another from the motor pool. There were always more motorcycles, more spare parts, more ammunition boxes, more jerry cans, more tires, more of everything war demanded. The German sergeant picked up a discarded technical manual for the WLA. It was printed in English, but its diagrams were clear and detailed. He was astonished at the level of documentation: exploded views showing how every part fit together, tables listing precise tolerances and adjustments, and troubleshooting sections covering common problems. The Americans had industrialized not just production, but also maintenance and training. Even a soldier with little mechanical knowledge could follow these manuals and complete repairs that would have required trained mechanics on German vehicles. This standardization extended beyond the motorcycle itself. The U.S. Army had built entire supply chains dedicated to motorcycle maintenance. Spare parts were cataloged, coded, and distributed through depots that ensured forward units received what they needed. Deliveries might not always be immediate, but they were reliable. It wasn't a flawless system, but it functioned on a scale the Germans could never match. Back in Germany, engineers and designers had built magnificent machines. The BMW R75, with its innovative three-wheel drive system, could climb obstacles that would stop a Harley cold. The Zundap KS75, with similar engineering, was equally impressive. Both represented the height of pre-war German mechanical excellence, but that excellence required resources Germany no longer possessed. In August 1942, BMW and Zundap agreed to standardize 70% of their parts to simplify production and maintenance. The resulting hybrid concept, known as the BMW 43, allowed mechanics to repair a BMW with parts from a destroyed Zundap, or vice versa. It helped somewhat, but it couldn't solve the fundamental problem. Germany simply wasn't building enough machines. Meanwhile, American industry operated at a pace that seemed unreal to German observers. Intelligence reports and captured documents showed that U.S. industrial output had doubled between 1940 and 1944. An economy that was already the world's largest had expanded to produce more weapons and vehicles than Britain, the Soviet Union, and all Axis nations combined. German propaganda dismissed this as exaggeration. It wasn't. The sergeant started one of the captured Harleys. The engine fired immediately, even though the motorcycle had been sitting unused for days. Its magneto-ignition worked independently of the battery. The flathead engine settled into that characteristic steady potato-potato rhythm of a V-twin. He revved the throttle. The response was smooth, clean, and immediate. It wasn't sophisticated engineering, it was the mechanical equivalent of a farmer's tractor engine. But it worked, and it kept working. As the engine idled, he realized the motorcycle wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of a far greater problem. German tactical brilliance and superior engineering couldn't overcome the cold mathematics of industrial war. The Wehrmacht had been built for short, decisive campaigns, blitzkrieg, lightning war, designed to win before the enemy could mobilize. That strategy had worked in Poland, in France, and even in the early stages of the invasion of the Soviet Union. But now the war had turned into exactly what Germany couldn't sustain: a long, grinding conflict of attrition where production capacity decided victory. In that kind of war, the nation that could build 90,000 motorcycles almost as an afterthought
while simultaneously producing hundreds of thousands of planes and tens of thousands of tanks, was destined to win. The Harley-Davidson WLA wasn't superior to the BMW R75. In most technical aspects, it was worse. But it existed in overwhelming numbers, backed by endless supplies and maintained by soldiers trained to follow simple, standardized manuals. The R75s, on the other hand, existed in limited numbers, dependent on fragile supply lines and maintained by increasingly scarce skilled mechanics. As casualties mounted and resources dwindled, even the best German machines couldn't keep up. Other soldiers had gathered around the sergeant, watching him study the American motorcycles. A young private asked whether they could use the captured machines. The sergeant nodded. Yes, they could. The WLA was simple enough for anyone with basic motorcycle experience to handle. But that practicality came with a bitter truth. Everyone in that maintenance bay understood it. The Americans had so many of these machines that losing hundreds meant nothing. They would simply build more, ship more, and replace what was lost faster than Germany could destroy it. A lieutenant arrived to inspect the captured motor pool. He asked about the condition of the bikes. The sergeant reported that most were operational, needing only fuel and minor adjustments. The officer nodded. These would be pressed into German service as was standard practice. Throughout the war, the Wehrmacht used captured equipment of every kind. French motorcycles, Soviet vehicles, British guns, American trucks, anything that could be repaired and maintained was put to use because German industry couldn't meet demand. But using captured American machines meant acknowledging something uncomfortable, that the enemy's surplus production outstripped Germany's total manufacturing power. It meant admitting that the Americans could abandon in a single small retreat more equipment than some German divisions had been issued in total. That realization spread through the German army like a slow poison, eroding the confidence that had once defined its early victories. The sergeant knew the BMW R75 was technically superior. He knew the Zundap KS75 was better suited for military use. He knew German craftsmanship represented the pinnacle of precision. And he also knew, with the cold certainty of mathematics, that none of it mattered. 73 Harley-Davidsons sat in one captured depot in Tunisia. 90,000 had been built. Parts for 30,000 more existed in warehouses. This, he realized, was what defeat looked like. Olive-drab paint, Springer forks, and stamped steel. The Americans had understood something deeper than the Germans ever did. The motorcycle itself was almost irrelevant. What truly mattered was the system, the supply chains, the training, the maintenance infrastructure, the replacement pipeline, and the industrial base capable of losing machines faster than the enemy could destroy them and still staying ahead.
The Harley-Davidson WLA was not a marvel of engineering. It was a cog in a military-industrial machine so vast that its true magnitude was almost beyond comprehension to those fighting against it. In Milwaukee, Harley-Davidson's factory floor buzzed around the clock. Workers, many of them women who had never set foot in a machine shop before the war, assembled motorcycles at a pace that would have seemed impossible in peacetime. The plant operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in 3 continuous shifts. Each worker was trained for a specific task, repeating it hundreds of times daily with mechanical precision. The assembly line flowed seamlessly, each station adding its contribution, until, at the end, a fully assembled motorcycle emerged, ready for Army inspection. This was not craftsmanship in the traditional sense. No master mechanic built an entire motorcycle from start to finish. No artisan lovingly tuned each engine. Yet the result was an industrial miracle, steady, repeatable production that sustained a global war effort. When a WLA broke down in Burma, replacement parts shipped from Milwaukee reached India and were distributed through the Army's supply network to the front. When a batch of bikes was destroyed in Italy by bombing, replacements arrived within weeks. The system worked because it had been designed to work at scale. German industry never achieved this level of organization. BMW and Zündap remained rooted in traditional manufacturing, dependent on skilled craftsmen performing complex tasks. Their quality was excellent, but their numbers were not. In an attempt to increase production, Germany turned to forced labor and concentration camp workers. The results were disastrous. Untrained laborers lacked the skills to handle precision manufacturing. Sabotage was constant, and quality plummeted just as demand soared. By 1944, the industrial situation was critical. Allied bombing had systematically targeted German industry, destroying factories, wrecking transport networks, and killing workers. Raw materials grew scarce as imports ceased and mines suffered damage. The synthetic fuel program, vital for keeping the Wehrmacht mobile, consumed resources that could have built other weapons. Germany was trying to fight a world war, occupy territories, produce wonder weapons like the V-2 rocket and the Me-262 jet fighter, and maintain its basic industrial output, all with an economy smaller than America's even before the war began. Back in Tunisia, the German sergeant shut off the captured Harley. The engine sputtered and died, leaving the motor pool in heavy silence. He looked around at his fellow soldiers, and in their expressions he saw the same grim understanding. They had all done the math. They all knew what these motorcycles truly represented. Some wars are decided by courage, others by tactical brilliance, superior weapons, or better training. This one, however, would be decided by industrial capacity, by which side could build more, ship more, replace more, and sustain more. And standing in that motor pool surrounded by 73 mass-produced American motorcycles, every German soldier there knew exactly which side that was. But the story didn't end in Tunisia. The WLA served in every theater of World War II. It rolled through the streets of liberated French, Belgian, and Dutch towns, earning the nickname Liberator from grateful civilians who saw Allied soldiers riding them. It hauled radio equipment across Pacific islands, carried dispatch riders through the mountains of Italy, escorted convoys in India, and patrolled the streets of China. Wherever American forces went, the WLA followed, not because it was the finest motorcycle ever built, but because there were enough of them to equip a global army. When the war ended in 1945, the remaining production orders were canceled, and surplus WLAs flooded the civilian market, selling for a fraction of their wartime cost. American soldiers bought them, stripped away the military fittings, and customized them for civilian life. These modified Harleys became the foundation of post-war motorcycle culture, sparking the rise of choppers and motorcycle clubs. The abundance of WLAs made motorcycling accessible to an entire generation of Americans. Many surplus WLAs also remained in the Soviet Union, which had received over 30,000 of them under the Lend-Lease program. There, in a country with little access to Western parts and almost no customization culture, the motorcycles were used sparingly and maintained in near original condition. Decades later, many of those same bikes survived the Cold War intact. Today, former Soviet republics are among the richest sources of original WLA parts and restoration projects, machines preserved by the very scarcity that once made them seem expendable. The production miracle represented by the WLA extended far beyond motorcycles. It symbolized what American industry could achieve when fully mobilized. The same principles that enabled Harley-Davidson to manufacture 90,000 motorcycles also allowed Ford's Willow Run plant to produce one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. The WLA was more than a machine. It was proof that America's true weapon in World War II wasn't a tank, a plane, or a gun. It was the industrial system itself. The Harley-Davidson WLA was never a technological marvel, but it was part of something far greater. A military-industrial machine so immense that its full scope remained beyond the comprehension of those fighting against it. The same system that produced these motorcycles also enabled Henry Kaiser's shipyards to launch Liberty ships faster than Germany's U-boats could sink them. and allowed American factories to build more aircraft in 1944 alone than Japan produced during the entire war. This was the true arsenal of democracy. Not a slogan, but a living reality powered by assembly lines that never stopped turning. Teachers, shop clerks, and homemakers became welders, machinists, and inspectors. They learned new skills with astonishing speed and sustained a level of production that buried the Axis powers under an avalanche of tanks, trucks, planes, and ammunition. The Germans had built some of the world's most advanced individual weapons. The Japanese had shown remarkable ingenuity in resource-limited conditions. But neither could compete with the sheer scale of American volume. The BMW R75 was a brilliant motorcycle. The Zundap KS750 performed heroically in harsh conditions. Both were masterpieces of engineering. Yet by 1945, BMW had built fewer than 17,000 R75s, and Zundap fewer than 19,000 KS750s. Harley-Davidson, meanwhile, had built over 90,000 WLAs, plus enough spare parts for 30,000 more, without ever straining its production capacity. That disparity decided the war. The outcome wasn't determined by a single battle or campaign, but by the cumulative weight of American industrial output that eventually crushed Axis resistance through sheer material superiority. Germany fought with brilliance and courage, often winning tactical victories against larger forces. But tactical brilliance has limits. Resources, when nearly infinite, do not. By 1944, America's factories were running at twice their pre-war capacity. Convoys of supply ships crossed the Atlantic in formations so massive they stretched beyond the horizon. Somewhere in Tunisia, a German sergeant who had once examined 73 captured Harleys could never forget that February day. Years later, in post-war interviews, he described that moment, the cold shock of realizing what those motorcycles truly represented. He remembered counting them, understanding what the numbers meant, and feeling the certainty that no amount of skill, courage, or tactical genius could overcome such overwhelming production power. Other German veterans described similar awakenings, seeing endless columns of trucks, mountains of supplies, skies filled with aircraft that never seemed to end. The WLA wasn't a wonder weapon. It wasn't revolutionary or impressive by performance standards, but it existed everywhere. Wherever American troops fought, the WLA was there, supported by a supply system that never failed, repaired by mechanics who never lacked parts, sustained by a production base that never stopped. It stood as a symbol of something far greater than itself, the industrial strength of a nation that could flood the battlefield with equipment while barely breaking stride. 73 motorcycles in one small motor pool in Tunisia. 90,000 built, parts for 30,000 more. That was what American industrial mobilization looked like from the receiving end. This was the true weapon that won the war. Not a single tank, ship, or airplane, but the system that produced them faster than the enemy could destroy them. The Wehrmacht mechanics who examined those Harleys understood immediately. They did the arithmetic and they knew the truth. Germany could not win, not against an opponent that built 90,000 motorcycles as a side project while simultaneously conquering half the globe. The Harley's flathead engine was simple. Its Springer front fork was outdated. Its 3-speed transmission was basic, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that ordinary American workers, most of them new to industrial labor, could build these machines by the tens of thousands, ship them across oceans, sustain them with flawless logistics, and replace them faster than combat could consume them. That was the real weapon. That was what Germany could never match. Standing in that captured motor pool in Tunisia, the German mechanics heard the thunder of American industry echoing in their minds. Its message was unmistakable. You can't outproduce us. You can't outsupply us. You can't replace your losses faster than we can create new ones. And in the end, we will bury you beneath an avalanche of steel, gasoline, and relentless industrial power. The Harley-Davidson WLA, crude, simple, and utterly overwhelming, carried that message across every battlefield. The war would continue for 2 more years, but the outcome had already been written in the language of production statistics and assembly line outputs.
Germany was fighting the arithmetic of industrial warfare, and the arithmetic was merciless. In the end, the WLA's greatest contribution wasn't in how it performed on the battlefield, but in what it revealed about the nation that built it. A country capable of producing 90,000 motorcycles while simultaneously building hundreds of thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of tanks possessed an industrial capacity beyond anything the Axis could ever hope to match. Those captured Harleys sitting silent in a Tunisian motor pool were more than just machines. They were evidence. They were proof. They were the mathematical certainty of defeat, written in mass-produced American steel. And every German soldier who looked at them understood with absolute clarity exactly what they meant.